We are officially 1 week away from free agency. The San Francisco 49ers, they've got a couple of decisions to make. They're currently a little bit over the salary cap, so you got that. But then they also got to figure out who they want to add to this roster. Me and Marco, we're going to do a little bit of breakdown of free agency, see what we think the 49ers should do, and ultimately what we believe they will do. All of that right after this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host here, Rohan Chakravarthi, alongside your other host, Marco Martinez. How you doing, my guy?
I'm doing good, man. How was Indy, man? You were there at the combine. You were able to see some of these players in person. Obviously, that was probably a phenomenal experience. You want to share any of that with anyone?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a blessing. Definitely grateful that I was able to go my first combine. And I mean, it's just the entire experience, from going there at the beginning in the morning, seeing the drills, everything that goes on behind the scenes. It was just really cool to kind of witness everything that kind of went on. Definitely glad to be a part of the experience. Got to meet some cool people overall. And yeah, definitely learned a lot from the process and got to spend time with some cool people.
Absolutely, definitely experience to remember, especially your first time. Um, One of those ones where you walk in and you're starstruck, like you memorize, like you will remember that forever. Like it's not, it gets different every time you go. I bet. I know at least it was for
Yeah.
me when I was in the booth, covering Stanford game. Like the first time you go in, just like, oh damn, like you take it all in, and then like the next couple times it's like, all right, it's business as usual.
I won't kid you. The first face I saw when I walked in the building to go get my credential was just Ryan Poles, Chicago's GM, just standing there, just chilling on the phone. I mean, it's just like that. Everybody's just kind of in one space together throughout the whole week. And that, I mean, that's just the cool aspect of the process. So definitely, definitely grateful to have gone there. And I'm excited to go back again next year.
It's definitely one of those ones where you definitely gotta be there and experience at least one time. Now we are 1 week away from obviously free agency. I know a lot of people want to add big names, a lot of people want to do things, but before the Niners can even do anything, like they really have to look at what players they should bring back, right? Like obviously the 49ers have a bunch of free agents. They have to essentially evaluate themselves in terms of who is worth bringing back on their roster and who is not worth it, right? In your opinion, is there any players on the roster that the Niners should sign? I know they've been in kind of like communication with John Feliciano, starting right guard, possibly a center. Um, he may be coming back. Is there anyone like you say guaranteed is coming back this year outside of Ross Dwelley, Kyle Shanahan's favorite player?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, if you look at this, the free agent list, it's both good and bad. What do I mean by that? The 49ers don't have any of their marquee players hitting the market this year. Their core is all under contract for 2024.
Mhm.
However, consequently, they don't really have players that they can cut to create cap space because a lot of the money is tied up to their core, which they seem pretty content with keeping for at least one more year in an effort to make a Super Bowl and ultimately win it in 2024. So, like I said, it's a bunch of role players in a sense that the 49ers are having that are hitting free agency. Though guys that I want to bring back, I would immediately point to, there are certain players. One, you look at a guy like Cleveland Farrell. I thought he played pretty well in his run, in the way that he played the run. He was a guy who you could count on for early downs. I think that he's a guy who the Niners should look to bring back, given the complexion of their roster. Guys who primarily right now are there to rush the passer. You do want a good balance, and the 49ers could welcome that back with Cleveland Farrell. It seems right now that Deshaun Gibson is likely to head to retirement. If not, he'd be another guy who you could consider. I know he's a veteran, but he's been pretty reliable in the 2 years he's been there. If you want a safety to return, that could be a guy, especially as Hufanga battles the injury that he's kind of facing, should be ready for week one. That could be another name. But elsewhere, I think you're looking at guys like John Feliciano, who the organization has already said they'd like back. You could look at guys like Chris Conley, some of those guys who might be fringe roster players. And then the big guy, obviously, is Juwan Jennings, who's a restricted free agent and should be back regardless this year.
Absolutely. Like when you look at the free agency list for the Niners, like it's really not anything outrageous where you're like that player must come back or it's gonna put a big hole in the Niners. Obviously, you have Javon Kinlaw, Chase Young, some of like those guys like actually were starters for the Niners at one point due to whether it was injuries or not having someone at that position. But like when you look at it, I don't truly see the Niners paying Chase Young 13 million. I mean, that's where Spot Rack has him in terms of his market value. And then with Javon Kinlaw, his value is around 5.4 million. I thought he had a career year. I thought he was phenomenal in the run game. Um, as a pass rusher, he looked a lot better than he has been because of his health, right? Like that's big. His biggest issue was not being able to stay healthy. Last year, he put it together. He looked like a really good player, but I just don't think the value at 5 million is there for a defensive tackle when you have 11 draft picks. You could get someone in the later rounds who not necessarily is going to fill that role right away and be what Javon Kinlaw was, but you could get a run stuffer late in the later rounds. There's also some defensive linemen in free agency where essentially you could get them at a bargain. So for me, I don't think Javon Kinlaw comes back. The only player I see making a strong case for himself in terms of being back for the 49ers is Cleveland Farrell. I thought he was a phenomenal player against the run. Um, not much against in the pass rushing ability and stuff like that, but that run defense is very important for the 49ers. Now they only have 6 players, I believe, on contract along the defensive line, so they have to put into consideration if that's important to them. But just going through the list, like when I keep looking at the Niners free agency list, it just to me, it's not nothing where it's like, oh dang it, like you better bring this player back. I'm not, to be honest, if the Niners didn't bring any of their free agents back, I wouldn't be mad about it. Like it's one of those ones where it's not gonna put a big gaping hole on their roster. Is there anyone else in terms of, I mean, I guess Jawan Jennings, the restricted free agent, but he's technically not a true free agent. So
Right, right.
what are your thoughts on him? Like I know obviously we're talking about players coming back. What do you see him getting contract wise?
Yeah, I mean, he'd be an intriguing guy. I think the baseline, right, is what the tender would be. I'd imagine the 49ers to use, if they had to go to a tender, a second round tender, which is around $4.6 million. I'd expect that to be what Jennings is looking to ask for in contract demands because, I mean, that's what you'd anticipate he'd get on a 1-year deal. The the likelihood, if you're looking for an extension, would be a multi-year deal. You could see what other slot receivers in the past have gotten, which are 3-year deals, or given that Jennings was a bit older and he has also been a restricted free agent for now 2 seasons because he was a 7th round pick, he could go for a 2-year deal for the hope to to hit free agency at an earlier age as well. I think both could be accessible. I think that overall, the top of Jennings's market would probably be in the $7 to $10 million range. That's what you can see some receivers getting. But given his overall production, probably his hope to stay in San Francisco, at least for his next contract, you could see something more so along the baseline of what that second round tender would be. Perhaps the $4.6 million category per year could be appealing to Jennings.
And it actually benefits the Niners to extend them in the sense of you essentially are lowering the cap numbers of that 6 point whatever kid you could lower it. Um, and then what Jawan Jennings should be looking at is he could put together 2 really good years. I know you've mentioned the Niners potentially trading Deebo Samuel, whether that's post the draft. You could essentially look at it where Deebo Samuel might not be on the roster after this coming season. So in 2025 season, Jawan Jennings, you could be looking at him as your number 2 receiver. And if he puts up good numbers, I mean, he's looking at free agency going into, I believe, his year 28 season, 28 or 29 season. I believe it's 29, could be wrong, but looking at a contract, or that's kind of a player where he's going to have a opportunity to up on some money. So I definitely think he's probably the only player I truly think should come back. Outside of that, everyone else, I don't mind if they hit the road and they pack their bags to go to another team. It really doesn't affect the Niners in terms of win with their entire core being here. Now, a lot of players could be restructured, right? Looking at contract, they could be restructured, they could be extended. Is there any player you're looking at in terms of on the roster right now that the 49ers should either extend immediately, they should restructure their contract in order to create more cap space or anything like that? I know a lot of people keep mentioning Charvarius Ward. Would you extend him now to create that? Would I believe it's around 9 million in cap space? I think you're muted, Rohan.
There we go. There are a couple of players that if you're looking at on this roster, you expect the 49ers to make some form of move. Now, the first would be a guy like Charvarius Ward. Why? Charvarius Ward is in the last year of his deal. He has an $18 million cap hit, slightly up from what was expected, which was a $15 million cap hit because the 49ers restructured his contract last offseason. Now, the reason that Ward is an ideal extension candidate, one, he's not too old yet. He's only 28 years old. He's entering his age 29 season. And so you could still probably get, cornerback one caliber play for the next 2 to 3 seasons, which makes it a little more feasible to
I
extend.
think you aged him 1 year, Rohan. I think he just turned 27. No, he's gonna turn in 20 to be 28 in May. My bad. I think you aged him a
Got
year.
it. So he's entering his age 28 season. So usually that prime is from that 28, 27, 28 to 31, 32 range. You could extend him throughout the entirety of his prime, but the more likelier reason that I feel the Niners may be inclined to extend him is because when you look at trying to preserve a contract, Charvarius Ward has a dead cap hit of $12 million next year that if the Niners do not bring him back would just be dead money for the team. Now, the Niners are going to be a bit more cap stricken as the years come along if they try and maintain their current core. In order to lower, to lower that dead cap hit next year while also lowering potentially his cap hit this year, the ideal situation would be to extend Charvarius Ward to a similar deal than what you got overall when you first signed him. Now that he's entering his prime, you'd hope to get a similar deal, potentially give him some more flexibility as with a 2 to 3 year deal. That way, you alleviate some of the dead cap money that he is owed in 2025, and you keep him as a 49er, helping your cap situation as well this year. One other player that I would like to mention, a guy who seems on the younger side, a guy who is kind of a part of the 49ers core, only 27 years old, in fact, just turned 27 years old, is Fred Warner. Fred Warner has a $24 million cap hit this year, and he had a 5-year deal. But next year he is ultimately he has a debt. He's got I believe it is a $26 million dead cap hit. So Warner is also primed, or $26 million cap hit. He's primed to see either some form of restructure, extension, some form of something to lower his cap hit both this year and in the future years, as he seems like a guy who's here to stay for the foreseeable future, as well as one of the 49ers core players, while other players might see an earlier demise to their tenure with the 49ers.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you in terms of I think Charvarius Ward and Fred Warner are two of the main guys you got to restructure or extend. Now, by doing that, you create, I believe it's $19 million. With that $19 million, you could do a lot with that in terms of that's one free agent, essentially, one big free agent in terms of what that cap number could be. And then when you look at the numbers going up next year, you're not really too worried about that because you could make some moves. You could create more cap space with the Debo trade next year or this after the draft. It all depends on what you want to do, right? So I do think the Niners do restructure players. Now, I don't know if it's for a big free agent signing. I would assume so if you're truly all in. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. But it's like you have to put money and create cap space. First, you got to do it to sign your rookie draft class, which is around 10 million, I believe. Now, you keep mentioning dead cap, and I know some people may be wondering what dead cap is. So, If I'm wrong, Rohan, correct me. So dead cap is essentially when you're paying for a player that is no longer on your roster, and you're paying him what he was guaranteed. So, for example, if Charvarius Ward, I know you mentioned Charvarius Ward may have a dead cap. If he is not on the Niners roster after next year, and he is playing for example, the Los Angeles Rams, the Niners are paying him that money, and he can still up on a contract. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. It is ultimately the money that the player is owed, not in cash, but in the cap, on cap hits when they are no longer on the roster. If they're still owed money, that is dead cap. And so ultimately, it kind of represents whatever, when you talk about restructures, what a restructure is you're taking someone's base salary and you're reworking the contract to where their base salary gets lowered to the league minimum or somewhere around there, which usually is in the range of $1 million, and then you're converting that exchanged money into a signing bonus. And the reason you do that is because the signing bonus can be prorated through the entirety of the contract, or a team could add void years, to where the cap hit extends past the contract's worth, because that helps alleviate some of the overall money that you're spending on a year-to-year basis. It lowers that so that you can spread it over more years. And so that ultimately is how a team usually gets involved with dead cap, as they're usually, in Ward's case, his contract is up, or he's a free agent before his contract ultimately is up, because the Niners added void years to his contract.
So that's what dead cap is. So if you were wondering, when a lot of people mention dead cap, essentially that's what that is. Now, me and Rohan both assume, and we know that they're going to restructure some of these contracts because they don't want to go in with no cap money into free agency. If something presents itself, you got to actually act on it. And essentially, it may not be announced right away, but it may be announced during free agency once they have come to agreement with a player. Then they could create that money, and that player's already in agreement. So they could move money around then. But you could essentially, even with guys like Trent Williams, if you really wanted to restructure him, even though he may no longer be around in a few years, what he could essentially do is, right before he retires, is do a retirement contract. And a lot of times what they do is they lower that contract so you don't take much dead cap, and it provides you with some cap relief. So if they truly wanted to, and they know that Trent Williams is going to be around until he retires, you could restructure Trent. That's $14 million. If you think Arik Armstead is one of those guys, you could do that too. I just don't like that one because it's a player who's consistently injured, and it sucks because he's a good player, but he's often injured. And he's getting up there in the age range of 30 plus. George Kittle, you could extend or restructure him. He creates 9.8 million. Now, I don't know if you do that one because he's again up there. But if they really want, they could create some good amount of money to sign some free agents. Like, that's definitely what they can do. So for a lot of people saying, well, they're in cap crisis, they're not. They could create cap money and go sign a free agent. Now, is there a free agent you would want to sign? You would want the Niners to sign? Now, I'm going to pull up a list of free agents. We're going to go through. I know a lot of people want to look at, obviously, the biggest need for the 49ers is essentially actually, before we do that, let's do this topic before. So the 49 free agency, give us an idea what the 49ers will do in the draft before we even talk about what players they may sign. Do you think this could tip their hand to us in sense of who they may or what they may do in the NFL draft?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I think overall the 49ers have a couple of opportunities. To me, when evaluating their cap situation, to me it becomes a little more clear that if the Niners want to go all in this year, that is a choice that ultimately could present them with their first Super Bowl opportunity, or the chance to win a Super Bowl, which they've been, going at for the past few decades. But should they choose to go all in this year, which usually means you have to have a few restructures, pushing some money back into the future, it seems like there's going to be a window in 2025 and beyond where the Niners are going to have to do what you're kind of seeing from the Buffalo Bills right now, which is cut ties and potentially not have replacement for players, because you're in a bit of a sticky cap situation overall, where you're struggling kind of to transition from one window to the next, because the Niners next year, it seems like they're primed for some big decisions. You could consider guys like Debo Samuel, George Kittle, and I mean, I think there are a number of players around the roster that you could consider where they might have to let players either walk in free agency to get just compensatory picks, or they might have to just move on via trade to save money or via a cut to save money because of the situation that they're going to be in. So, should they choose to restructure more players and put themselves in a bigger hole, that might be the decision where they have to go. Or they could look to maybe not restructure as many contracts, not say create as much cap space, and that might indicate they're looking to preserve the future a little more. But that also might indicate there might not be going all in terms of our definition in 2024 in the hopes of winning the Super Bowl, understanding that they're trying to preserve the window a little further by drafting well and also trusting some more of the young guys to develop. Curious to see in the direction that they go, but I do believe by free agency, it'll be a little clearer on the way the San Francisco 49ers ultimately do want to go, depending on the restructures that they make and the way that they create cap space ahead of free agency in order to fill out their needs.
I absolutely agree because like there's a couple of players out there in the interior offensive line. There's a guys on tackle where if they truly wanted, they could go out and sign them. Like they could go get some offensive linemen now in a deep draft class. It would allow them to go best player available in the first round and not have to trade up. Or if they see someone who's falling, for example, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who they think may be the best corner in the class, they could trade up and get him. It all just depends on, in my opinion, I do think it kind of does give you a tip on what they do in free agency. I know Kyle Shanahan 1 year mentioned that he wishes the free agency was after the draft class because after you draft players, you could kind of see what positions you're in need of, and you could kind of address your needs after the draft. So it kind of sounds like I don't know if they'll address their needs now in free agency, but I definitely think the Niners should definitely take a look at what is out there, whether it's on the edge, offensive tackles class. I'm gonna pull up a. I'm gonna take our banner down. I'm gonna pull up a sheet. Shout out to Steph Sanchez for introducing this cheat sheet to us. If you guys don't follow Steph Sanchez, so essentially, hopefully you guys can see this. It has quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends. Has a list. Now I know the chat's going crazy about quarterbacks right now, and I do see you guys. I don't think quarterback is going to happen. Some of you guys are saying trade for Justin Fields. Someone said Russell Wilson. I mean, if the Niners do go quarterback, which I don't think they're gonna do, that quarterback would be right here. Is at the top of the list. Kirk Cousins, very familiar with Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan truly likes him, but I don't see quarterback being a go-to guy. I know there's interest, the rumor that a former Niner quarterback might be headed to Minnesota, but I don't get why people are mentioning quarterback. Brock Purdy is our quarterback for the future. You got to build around him. Rohan, is there any position you think the Niners should address in free agency, and should there be any positions we take a look at first?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a staunch supporter of the Niners addressing offensive line free agency. Now, as we spoke earlier, it might not be that the Niners may have a significant amount of free agency spending money, which is why I'm not sure as much that I'm for the 49ers looking to spend all of their money, put all their eggs in one basket, essentially spending a majority of their free agency cap space into one player. Instead, I think that with the way that this specific free agency class, especially at offensive line, is going, you're going to find 1 to 2 mid-tier signings that will have value for you that you can find in the 5 to 10 million a year range that will be accessible for the 49ers. I like how you zoomed in on center because this is the number one position that I want the 49ers to target
I
this
know you too
offseason.
well, brother. I know you too well, and I know exactly what you're thinking.
Exactly, because if you look at it, the 49ers, that position, center, is extremely important in the offense. I think the 49ers really struggled last offseason. They were looking to get other players. We'd heard about how they were interested in guys like Garrett Bradbury, even looking into guys like Bradley Bozeman. I think that there was a strong contingent of centers available on the market. And for cheap, Bradbury only got like $5.1 million a year, whereas Jake Brendel got $5 million a year annually on his 4-year deal. The Brendel re-signing didn't really work. It seemed like he regressed this year after a strong start. So the 49ers are back in my opinion, to trying to find an option in free agency. And if you look at the names, I think there are several players there that are very worthy of potentially getting a free agent contract for the 49ers. Specifically, if you look at the top four names, I think all four of those guys would be strong signings for the 49ers. Loey Kishenberry, I think he was pretty consistent this year. After a really inconsistent first 3 years, he might get the biggest contract on the market. Andre James out of Las Vegas, he might get a 3-year deal, maybe in the range of 27 to 30 million in total, $9 to $10 million. But then a guy even like Connor Williams, who's coming off an ACL tear, maybe may miss the first game or two of the regular season. I think Connor Williams had a great start to the 2023 season for the Miami Dolphins. He's very familiar with the scheme now, having played there under Mike McDaniel for the last 2 years. And his injury might scare off other teams, but if the medicals end up working out, the 49ers could look to target him and him being, the center for the next few years, because it is ultimately a really important position, the position that calls out protections. And Kyle Shanahan himself has he's shared the value of the position. That's why he went out and got Alex Mack. That's why it's been really a veteran every time Kyle Shanahan has been in, has gone to address the position. It's been a veteran. So that's why I'm going for center.
So I'm going to address center real quick, but I'm also going to address this. Great tone. I'm with you in terms of I don't know if Brock's the answer, but the thing is I've seen enough that the Niners should probably build around Brock. This is his first year. He had a rehab and injury. I'm not going to sit here and say Brock Purdy isn't a guy we can't build around. Now I get where you're saying you're saying what else does he need? He had a bunch of weapons and this and that. But if you look at it, the offensive line wasn't great. So I'm not going to argue here in terms of Brock Purdy showed us enough to essentially say let's build around him. The Niners aren't moving off of him. Like it is what it is. Like I was in the same situation as you. I was believing like, you know what, don't know if me and Rohan both said before the NFL season we didn't think the Niners would win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy this first year. But you also have to look at the Niners have seen enough. He put on a good enough film. His stats are there to prove it and back it up. We're moving forward. It's Brock Purdy's team. Let's move forward. I was with you at one point, but you know what? I'm not making decisions in San Francisco, so we got to deal with it. Let's move forward. I think the Niners are going forward with Brock Purdy. It's obvious. So the center position is one of the biggest positions I think Kyle Shanahan needs to address. Right? He wanted to do it this first year. He came around with Richburg. I believe that was his last name. I might have butchered that. Rohan, correct me if I'm wrong. Alex Mack. And then he kind of tries to figure out what to do next. Now, there's a couple of guys I like on this list. Brian Allen. I think Brian Allen is going to get a bigger contract than people think, but he understands the system. He was with Los Angeles. Understands Kyle's system. He's a young guy, 28. So essentially, you could get him for a good price. And you're going to have him for his best years. I was high last year on Scott Queensberry. I don't think he's leaving Houston. Could be wrong. I would like the Niners to try to make a move on a center. A lot of people keep mentioning tackle, guard, but when I look at the NFL draft, if you're going to get a position this year, it's right guard and tackle. I don't see a slam dunk center that could be there for the 49ers outside of possibly Jackson Powers, right? So for me, outside of that, there's a couple of them in the mid round. Hunter Nozard, who you could potentially get, and he could be a plug and play guy. But that's projecting where you could get him, and that's if the team doesn't take him before you. If you want to upgrade the offensive line immediately, upgrading at the center position is perfect. Nick Allegretti was a played guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. If he could play center, I thought he was phenomenal for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, as well as the AFC Championship. Played with a torn elbow in the Super Bowl and played phenomenal. But for me, I think the biggest positions that the 49ers should take a look at, and I know everyone's saying upgrade at center, upgrade at guard or tackle. I think they're going to upgrade through the offensive line at some point. I don't know if it's free agency, NFL draft, but I'm looking at the edge rushing position, Rohan. For me, when I look at it, and we'll get to guard and tackle in a moment. But I think my number one position is edge rusher. When I look at the edge rushing position, it's actually a pretty deep class for free agency. Now you got guys at the top of the list. Josh Allen, who was just franchise tag, so he's off this list. You have Daniil Hunter. He'll probably get a good payday. Jonathan Greenard from Houston probably gets a good payday. You got Bryce Huff from New York Jets. You may be able to get him on a night around 9 to 10 million per year contract. But the guys I'm looking at are a little bit farther down the list, and the reason is Josh Uch from New England. May have said his last name wrong. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But when you look at him, he is a speed guy off the edge. He had 10 plus sacks last season. This season he struggled. He only had, I believe, 3 sacks, 11 and a half
Yeah.
the previous year. So when I'm looking at Josh Uch, I'm looking at him as potentially a guy that the Niners could see as potentially that D Ford person, like that who D Ford was. So I could see that. Another guy I don't mind the 49ers bringing in, Marcus Davenport, was not good in Minnesota due to injuries. He has the frame to move inside and be a D tackle, edge rusher. So for me, I'm kind of looking at the bottom tier guys in free agency. Yannick Ngakwe, definitely looking at those kind of guys. I'm kind of trying to key in on. Now, a lot of people want the home run splash. I don't want a home run signing. I want someone who's going to come in and be complementary to the 49ers roster, whether that's an edge rusher or a offensive guard, tackle, center. Is there anyone edge rushing wise that you're like, you know what? I want the Niners to go sign.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point, and the reason I'm glad we started with center is because initially going into this free agency, my thought process was I wanted two mid-tier signings for the 49ers. One was going to be at center, where you could pay a guy in between $5 to $10 million. That would be the guy who takes over, the veteran that Kyle Shanahan trusts. The other was, in my opinion, going to be a guard. I had done a good amount of research on guards. I thought the 49ers could look to potentially, kind of get that right guard position handled, especially given the fact of how inconsistent it was last year. But my thought process in a way has shifted on that. Not Shanahan, but General Manager John Lynch kind of pointed to optimism of bringing John Feliciano back. It seems like he's going to be at least the favorite right now to start at right guard next year, while the 49ers are very interested in some of those guard tackle prospects in the first round in the NFL draft. So I'm pivoting away from the guard. And so if I were to look elsewhere, it would be edge. It would definitely be edge or somewhere along the defensive line, just because the Niners themselves, they do a good job at, identifying talent along the edge. And this just in general seems like a good edge class. And some of the players Marco pointed out, let's start with Josh Uche. Well, what is Josh Uche? He's a player who has been very good before for the New England Patriots, a guy who might have not always been the best fit for their system, but a guy who has produced double-digit sacks in the past, who's coming off a down year. The Niners, that's a player who they should look to target, because what are you going to do? You're going to get him for a bargain. He's going to be on a 1-year prove-it deal. That's something the Niners should be interested in, because those are the type of players they target at edge in free agency or even via trade. You talk about a guy like Chase Young, a guy who, who he himself might face a 1-year prove-it deal. But you talk about, the type of caliber that the Niners are trying to get in the past. That's the type that they go for. And I think that there are a lot of those type of names where you might find good edge value at some point in this free agency class. The question is how much you're willing to spend for that 1-year type of deal. Is it going to be in excess of $10 million, which in my indication would be more of a splash signing? I don't know. I think the Niners may look for more of a bargain player, and that's where I'd position my money. One player to kind of fill that void at center, so that you could focus on. You don't have to necessarily worry about that throughout the draft. You can focus on identifying less of that as less of a need, and then one at edge. Same philosophy. You're not going into the draft where you're saying we need to just we need to address this position because it's a need. The Niners usually like to address that defensive line position. Try and go in there with more of an open mind. Go BPA and try and find the best players to fit your team.
And based off of Spot Rack, they have actually Josh Uche's contract, 25 years old, drafted in the second round out of Michigan at $8.3 million. Now again, he had, like Rohan said, he had 11 and a half sacks last year. This year, only 3 sacks. But one thing that when you watch Uche is the bend off the edge, the speed off the edge. Looking at his win percentage, he had a 17.1 pressure rate. Like, just looking at Josh, like, to be honest, it reminds me of the mold that the Niners truly want opposite of Nick Bosa. Like, it just makes too much sense for the Niners to go after someone who, if you could essentially get him on a 3-year, $30 million deal, like if that's the money like he's looking for, or that is his average market, it just makes too much sense to get someone opposite of Nick Bosa with that speed. We've seen what the Niners defense is when they have someone like D Ford opposite of Nick Bosa. Now, I'm not comparing Uche to Ford as a player, but that speed element as a pass rusher, that bend around the edge, is phenomenal. So for me, I think Uche is the main guy at edge I see, because I'm just trying to feel what the Niners have looked at for their defense in the past. Now, we could talk about guard and tackle, right? Do you think guard and tackle are more important than getting a corner in free agency? Because I know we've been talking about free agency, and you're a lot higher on the cornerback class in free agency. I don't know if that's what you're higher on, but you think it's more
Mhm.
realistic. Would you like to look at the corner class, or would you prefer to look at the guards and tackles?
I'd say corner. And here's the reason why. The Niners, when you look at their philosophy, they usually like to have a plan in place and then they like to draft to kind of have the next plan in place. And so if you look at the roster, whether you agree with it or not, it feels that the Niners have a plan in place at guard and at tackle. The plan in place at guard seems to be John Feliciano, who likely comes back on another 1-year deal as he's, getting on that other age of 30, going on a year-by-year kind of contract as he contemplates his future. And then the plan in place at tackle is Colton McKivitz, who is on a very reasonable $3.5 million contract on the second year of his deal, about the price that you would anticipate for a swing tackle, who could also, he showed this year, who, if needed, the Niners will start him there or potentially even kick him to guard to compete with Feliciano at guard should they draft a tackle that they feel comfortable with. Regardless, though, it feels they have plans in place at that at that guard tackle position with the ability to add competition via the draft and things like that. As for
And with
corner,
that,
though,
and
oh, go
usually
ahead.
too,
Yeah.
Rohan, like, because I know you brought up a good point. Like, you have Colton McKivitz, you have Feliciano planning on coming back, and usually what happens is when you have players along the offensive line come back and you have continuity along the offensive line, it usually tends to get better. Like, you understand how that player works, how they pass off and pass rushing and stunts and stuff like that. So it usually tends to get better. Now, it all depends on how everything works, and everything like that. So I agree with you. They have a plan in place, at least temporarily, where it doesn't make right tackle and right guard an extreme need. Like, they could get away. Obviously, they got to the Super Bowl with that offensive tackle and that right guard. Essentially, what lost them the Super Bowl was their right side of the offensive line. So you expect them to upgrade, but they've shown they could get there. So it's not like we must get there. It's not like it's as bad as other teams' offensive line. So for me, I think that's
Right.
a big one. Now, corner, right? I'm gonna bring this super chat up just because it's a great question or a great point. Um, Low the Truth 81 says we need to swoop on Tre'Davious White when White. He's good when healthy. I know you're talking about corner. It just got announced he's being cut. What's your opinion on that one?
Now, I have a soft spot for Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White was at one point my favorite corner in the NFL. Loved the way he played. I thought he had a competitive spirit. He was an undersized corner who found a way to excel in zone coverage. And back in that 2019-2020 system when we had Richard Sherman in that role, that the guy who I thought would excel in that role was Tre'Davious White. Now, this is coming from a guy who I said really respects Tre'Davious White, thought of him as the top corner in the league at one point. I don't think he's the fit for this 49ers team. One, he is going to be on a 1-year prove it deal, but he's played only 21 games in the last 3 years, 10 in the last 2 years. So he's been injury prone in the last 2 years, coming off another season ending surgery. You question how much of an impact he'll make, specifically in this system when he's more pressed or more, he seems better suited for that off coverage zone responsibility where he excelled back in his prime. And so to me, when you talk about those type of cornerbacks, one, I expect him to still get a good amount of interest, and two, price range and the injury history may cause the 49ers to shy away, especially when you look at the guys that they've looked to kind of target in the at least in recent memory. They shied away from the older version in K1 Williams. I know it didn't work, but the guy who they went at quarterback last offseason was Isaiah Oliver. I think there's a since they signed Charvarius Ward, there's been a desire to get younger in the cornerback room, to get younger, to get more athletic, to get longer, and to kind of suit that press man type of style. So I don't know if Tre'Davious White, is the guy who kind of fits that mold. I would pass on him, even though I've been a huge fan of Tre'Davious White his whole career.
I think it's crazy. I don't know if you're paying attention to the chat a little bit, but Steve-O
No.
and Great Tone have been going at it about they brought up Jimmy Garoppolo, which is like extremely crazy because he's with the Raiders or gonna be cut or whatever. But they're talking about Brock Purdy still and arguing there. But I'll let that keep going. Respect to you guys. You guys keep arguing about the quarterback situation. It's nothing's changing at quarterback.
Hey,
Now,
we appreciate y'all though. Keeping that chat live, keep going at it. Go ahead. As long as it's a healthy discourse, we encourage it.
Hey, shout out to you though, Great Tone. I appreciate you, man. Make sure you guys subscribe to both channels. Cut Gene Sports, Rohan Chakravarti's personal channel. Keep that chat live. Make sure you guys go back and forth and have some entertainment with each other. Respect both you, everyone in the chat. Now, you mentioned cornerbacks, and I know you're high on some of these cornerbacks. Not necessarily, I shouldn't say high. I'm not going to say high. But there's a few out there that you would be willing to bring in. Is there any on this list? And I could scroll down on this list if you need me to. I could go through it list by list if you're able to see it. I don't know if it's visible for you.
Yeah, I think overall, the reason that I personally like cornerback in free agency, I genuinely believe this position usually has more players than what teams are usually, looking for. And so that's why I believe free agency, cornerback is the one position where you ultimately can get a bargain. That's why year after year, you see these certain players who outplay their contracts. A prime example for the 49ers is Charvarius Ward, who was a CB1 type of player who didn't necessarily get top of the line money and now has outplayed his contract of 3 years, $40.5 million. Even some of the older guys, Stephon Gilmore, and you see these revelations. Back 2 years ago, Casey Hayward got $5 million and balled out as a cornerback. You see these 1 year revelations, even with some of the older guys, which is why I'm not as opposed to going after a more experienced, more veteran corner. Now, do I expect the 49ers to do that? Maybe not. I think that they'll still try and choose the younger path as they've done in the past. And so that's why I feel, if you're looking at a corner, I'd look on the brighter side of 30, and that's where the good thing is you have versatility with the way Diamador Lenore is used, and that's where I'd target maybe a guy like Kenny Moore. Kenny Moore seems like he's primed at the age of 28, probably wants one more deal before his retirement, one more marquee deal, and so I think he'd be primed for a 2-year deal, somewhere in the range of $15 to $16 million in total, $7 to $8 million a year. And when I talk about mid-tier signings that provide value, $7 to $8 million a year for a player of Kenny Moore's caliber entering his prime, I think that possesses value. Moore has been reliable throughout his career, played over 1,000 snaps last year, a guy who can work well out of the slot, and that's a position the Niners covet in this defense, given the responsibilities the slot has both in the run and in the passing game. I think that he would be a solid pickup that the Niners could look after elsewhere. I know people want the top tier players. You're talking about guys like Jalen Johnson, who got franchise tagged. You're talking about some of the upper players, but a guy who you might even welcome back is Akella Witherspoon. Witherspoon has enjoyed
Really good year last year.
Yeah, some strong years outside of San Francisco, especially with the Los Angeles Rams kind of picking up the pieces on that secondary, which was a bit battered. He's another guy who's young. He's another younger guy on the bright side of 30, and so I believe he's entering his age 29 season, if I'm not mistaken. And so he's there. I mean, but I think you can look across the board. Guys younger than 30, Kendall Fuller is there that you can see on the screen. Other guys are like Chidobe Awuzie. I think Trey Herndon, Keon Crossan if you're looking for more of the special teamers, Keyshawn Nixon if you're looking for more of the special teamers. I mean, there are a lot of players that I think you could find value for at corner, just because this is a position where I feel like there's usually a surplus in free agency due to teams not willing to pay the position as much, which lead to bargains and bargains on 1-year deals.
Yeah, I think you hit all the points in terms of the Niners can essentially get a starting corner for much cheaper than when you have to extend them, right? Like what happens is teams, they covet the top 15 centers and they overpay them because they don't want to let them go. They don't want to let them walk. Now what happens is you start seeing teams start at that point when they extend them towards their back end of their career, they cut them to save cap money. And that's when you start seeing bargain deals where you could get in my opinion, for example, the Stephon Gilmore, phenomenal year last year. He readjusted his game, had a good season for the Dallas Cowboys. But for me, the person I'm looking at is Christian Fulton. Now he was with the
I forgot him.
Tennessee
That was one of my
Titans.
guys too. Yeah, go ahead.
He was my cornerback one in 2020. Has had up and down years in Tennessee. Has shown flashes that he could match up with number one receivers on the outside. In my opinion, he's battled through so many injuries in Tennessee that he shouldn't have played through because all it did was hurt his value. But you're looking at a player where you could get him on a 3-year deal, $20 million, and he's going into his, I believe it's age 25 season. For me, those are players where I'm looking at, I'm like, you know what? That makes the 49ers better. Now, when I look at it, I know a lot of people are like, well, the Niners should put Phenomenal Lenore back outside and they should move whoever inside. I think Christian Fulton gives you that versatility. He's going to turn 26 in September. He could play inside. He could play outside. He's athletic enough to do either one. But in my opinion, the whole purpose is you have to just upgrade where Ambry Thomas was. So, for example, if the Niners think Christian Fulton is an outside corner, right? You sign him. I thought Phenomenal Lenore was phenomenal in the slot. I thought he gelled the 49ers defense together so well that it's kind of hard for me to say, you know what, let's move Demo back outside. You could be an elite corner inside. I think that it's very possible to get paid as a nickel corner because the NFL has gone so much nickel that player's on the field so often. So I think the Niners could eventually opt to pay Phenomenal Lenore what he's worth, but also at the same time is you're just looking to replace Ambry Thomas, whether that's keeping Demo inside. So for me, I think Christian Fulton. I know Dory Jackson. If you want to go with a speedy guy, you could throw him in the nickel. You could throw him outside. So essentially, the Niners could upgrade very easily at the cornerback position. You mentioned a lot of guys. If you want to go the bigger corners, you got Sean Murphy-Bunting, who probably sees a bigger payday than some of the other guys just because he has more film out there and he's put together a better career so far to this point. For me, it's just honestly, depending on what the Niners truly want to do, because there's players there and you could truly say, you know what, that's the guy we need. I don't truly see essentially a corner on this list where it's like, or a corner on this list where if the Niners don't sign him, I'm going to be mad. Or if the Niners do sign him, I'm like, okay, that was stupid. Like I get it if you bring someone in to compete. Levi Wallace out of Pittsburgh. Levi Wallace, he's had good years. He's had down years, but he's a solid player. So for me, I'm looking at it. I'm like, you know what? I'm not too worried on who they sign if they sign a corner because they're essentially going to get a good player. So for example, Levi Wallace, his market value is going to be 29. His market value is at $6 million. So again, like Rohan was saying, you're going to get a very good player for a very good price. It's a bargain. I'm not really looking at those players who are extremely expensive. So for me, end of the day, I'm going with upside. I'm going to go. I've seen Christian Fulton have really good games. He's had down games, injuries. I'm going upside. Christian Fulton's my guy, cornerback one in that 2020 class. I would bring him in and see if you could catch lightning in a bottle. Or you could go people that were in that class as well. CJ Henderson from Carolina. Nothing has not been as good as people were expecting. A lot of people had him as cornerback one. But the Niners tend to try to bring a player in they feel they could resurrect their career. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm looking at is they look for those bargains. That's what John Lynch likes to do. My defensive line could fix you, come in on a cheaper deal. Now
I
we have
think I was just going to say, I think that's fair. The one thing about Fulton, I think his worst year as a pro was this past year, which could bring him for cheaper. And the one other thing about corner is that I think the Niners want to have a plan there as well. It's a good nickel corner class. I think it's time for the Niners to draft a nickel corner, potentially in that third round. That's usually, at least that's where those nickel corners seem projected to go. You sign a guy, then you have a nickel corner in waiting who could probably take over the reins in 2025.
absolutely. I think that's definitely the smarter plan to do because you're probably not going to throw a rookie nickel into this fold unless you draft them in the first round or high second round because you traded up for that guy. Like you just really not gonna put a rookie on the field. Like they were reluctant to put Jair Brown on the field, and when they finally did, good player. So like the Niners don't really like to play rookie. So great point there, Rohan. Now guards and tackles. Is there anyone that I I mean I'm not this tackle class and the guard class isn't amazing. If anything, the guards are better than the tackles, in my opinion.
I
I'm
think
not
the guards are 100% better than the tackles. Yeah.
so for me, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking the only tackle, Michael Onwenu, probably said that wrong from New England. He could play guard and tackle. The Niners would probably view him more as a guard. I could be wrong though. Now, it's, at the end of the day, you have to essentially look at who is going to fit the Niners system. There's guards there, in my opinion, that fit the system a lot better than people think. For example, you got John Feliciano already planning on coming back. That's what the Niners plan on doing. I personally think Graham Glasgow from
Yeah.
Detroit, if you could get him,
He's
he's
on my list.
31. You could get him on a solid contract. I know a lot of people are saying Robert Hunt. I think he's going to be too expensive. Had a good year in Miami. Now, it all just depends on what Kyle and John plan on doing. Do they plan on spending big in free agency on the offensive line? If they do, in that case, go sign your favorite offensive lineman. But I don't think it's smart decision making when it's such a deep offensive line class. I don't know what your opinion is on that though.
I mean, like I said, initially I wanted the 49ers to go after both the guard and the center. Tackle is interesting. I'm usually against signing tackles in free agency, and I think history is on my side in the sense that you usually overpay for a tackle.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's kind of been the case, especially you saw last year. Mike McGlinchey got a big contract. Jawan Taylor got a big contract. Generally, because of the positional value and the lack of overall talent at the position, it's harder to find tackles, and it's also more. That's why more teams are willing to pay average level tackles above average level money. And so, to me, that's why I'm usually opposed to a tackle signing in free agency. As for the guard class, though, I think there are a couple of good names. You look at the top of the list. I think there are four that stand out. It depends on whether you view Michael Onwenu as a guard or a tackle, but if you view him as a guard, him, Kevin Dotson, Robert Hunt, and Kevin Zeitler on my personal list is the top four in this class that I think could get good money. Zeitler probably more on a 1 to 2 year deal given his age, but the other three could get, 3 to 4 year deals in excess of $15 million a year annually. Do the Niners want to pay one player significant money? If so, one of those three guys could fit the mold of who they're looking for. But overall, I think that there is also a good amount of talented guards in this class. We've pointed out some of the centers that I liked. I mean, Connor Williams, Andre James, Lloyd Cushenberry, those are some of the top guys. Even Tyler Biotish. I mean, if you're looking for maybe some of the mid-range guys, Aaron Brewer, Tennessee center, he had a pretty solid year. Another guy was Brian Allen, who just got cut by the Rams. Even if you want to look at another Rams guy, Coleman Shelton is there. And so I think there are a couple of guys. As for guards, Graham Glasnow was on my list. Jonah Jackson of the Detroit Lions. He'll probably be in the upper echelon of guard money, but he could be, another solid guy. Damian Lewis from Seattle, more of a bigger bodied guy, but he could be a mid-tier guy that you could look for. Dalton Reisner, I think he had a pretty solid year in Minnesota after stepping in for Ezra Cleveland midseason when he got signed. And then we pointed out some of the top guys. So I think there are good guys ranging from the top of the market to the middle of the market that the Niners could go for. The only reason I didn't mention the guards initially is because it feels unrealistic at this point, given that the 49ers are looking to bring back a guy like John Feliciano. It seems they want to go the cheaper route, look to spend their money at other positions, and then go with a similar approach with Feliciano likely taking over at right guard in 2023.
So as I'm scrolling through, I'm trying to see like if there's anyone down the list that you could possibly get at a cheaper rate. Justin Pugh had a really good year for the New York Giants last year. But even like going down this list, there's not many players you're gonna get at a bargain. Like there's again, when you're in free agency, the teams that usually overspend aren't the better teams. It's usually the teams that are not good. It's the teams that have a lot of cap space. The Niners did last year. They signed Javon Hargrave. I didn't think that was a good signing. I thought that was going to make their run defense worse. So, like, when you overspend, it causes you to not have such a great offensive or team. Like, you're overspending on one player to hopefully he fits your system the right way. You're projecting him to be the same player in your system. Not necessarily going to be the same player just because he was good when he was with Minnesota or just like, you know what I mean? Like, so we also got to put into consideration on that part as well. So I don't think the Niners spend big on offensive line. I think Kyle is going to be very confident in guys like Colton McKivitz and stuff like that. Is there any other positions you potentially think the Niners could go out and sign? Um, tight end 2, maybe 3.
I think, yeah. I think the one other thing is if you don't necessarily trust the players in the room, you could look to fill that linebacker 3 spot. They got because Oren Burks is hitting free agency. If you don't trust the young guys in the room, if you want to try and find value, I know a lot of people are looking at a couple of the names. Aziz Al-Shaair, I think he's going to be way out of the Niners price range.
Oh
Other
yeah.
people might be looking at the Seattle names, given that Seattle, Nick Sorensen was just hired as the defensive coordinator. Guys like Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, not sure that the 49ers would be intrigued by those guys. I don't think so. Brooks maybe, but I don't think Brooks would come to San Francisco at at the price San Francisco is looking for. So you maybe look at linebacker if you're not as confident in the guys, but it also just might be time for guys like D. Winters, Jalen Graham. Likely DFF comes back for those 3 to kind of step up into a bigger role this year. While the Niners also probably go with more nickel. You might not see as many base packages with 3 linebackers on the field. You might see primarily with 2. But with Dre Greenlaw's injury, wouldn't be surprised if they go for a cheaper signing at linebacker to fill that linebacker kind of 2 to 3 kind of hole.
To be honest, like when I'm looking at it, right, like it's kind of hard to pinpoint a linebacker because you are losing a few linebackers. You're losing Oren Burks. You're losing Flanagan Fowles. So when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at someone who could play special teams, right? When I look at guys like that, Jude Tranquil, who from Kansas City, I'm looking at Willie Gay, but he's probably going to get around $8 million. That's too
I
much
think
for the
both of
49ers.
them will get a good amount of money. Yeah.
So like those at that point, you're looking at players who are out of the Niners price range. After that, it's a fall off, and you drafted 2 young players for a reason, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and like, you know what, the Niners they need to draft better. Like obviously, when you draft players and you're trying to develop them year 1, usually is when the Niners see a year 2 jump. So I think essentially the Niners are going to rely on who they drafted because it's only going to be for about half the year. I don't see them going and signing someone for $6-7 million to be a linebacker 3, only play for half the season, and then get bumped to only playing about 30 to 40% of the time, at most 40% of the time when you're in base package. I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
I think they're going to roll with D. Winters or Jalen Graham. Linebackers is out of the picture. I know a lot of people want to see a tight end 2 eventually. Niners keep going for a tight end 2. They drafted 2 of them. Both weren't good. Is there any tight ends that you possibly could bring in as that tight end 2?
It's similar to me to offensive line, specifically tackle, in the sense that I'm not an advocate for signing a tight end in free agency. I think tight end has become a little bit more of a marquee position because teams have realized that a good way to, to kind of evolve your passing offense is to throw out a 21 personnel, which means you want to have 2 tight ends on the field, which is why a lot of teams prioritize that second tight end. Now, a lot of players get, signed and then cut. So you'll see a lot of turnover at the position. But a tight end too might cost you in the range of $5 to $10 million annually on 2 to 3 year deals. I don't think the Niners can spend that type of money on a tight end too, especially given the way that they handle the position currently. I think they need to give a guy like George Kittle more targets, and I also think that when you're looking at that tight end two for the Niners, I think you're specifically looking for a guy who can execute the blocking part of your system with the hope of potentially developing into more. That's why Charlie Warner has played well in his role and has stayed with the team for a while. If you're looking for a cost-effective solution, I think the Niners just roll back with him and go ahead with him as their likely tight end two in 2024. Hope that either they draft somebody or that one of the guys they did draft develops. Otherwise, it might be an ugly offseason for some of those younger guys this year.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people. I'm gonna bring that down because all the free agents that we're pretty much looking at. A lot of people really kind of want the Niners to address free agency and go in and be all in, right? Like there's a difference between being all in. Um, and I had the wrong question up there. This should have been the question up there this entire time. I had the that's hella funny. I had the free agency about the draft. Now, obviously the 49ers, we mentioned a lot of players that we would sign. Are the 49ers truly all in, Rohan? Are they truly all in? Like, cuz this will show us, right? Like, are they? I think you're muted.
There we go. Not again. But I think overall, I think you're going to find out this upcoming week. I'm not necessarily certain that the 49ers like it's a weird kind of limbo situation where I think the Niners are going to try and run it back one more time with their current core. Now, I know I wrote an article about Deebo Samuel potentially being on the move. It was primarily based on something I had heard at the combine, when we were there, alongside the 49ers pretty much affirmation or their commitment to Brandon Ayuk, which Ian Rappaport kind of said earlier this week. They've showed that they're kind of having a shift in their offensive identity, kind of committing more so to their younger,
Good.
more traditional receiver. And so that could be a case, but also the Niners could look to move Deebo Samuel next offseason rather than this offseason. Sure, it might create some more cap ramifications, but they could also, or you might not get as much in return, but they could also look to run it back one more time with this core before blowing it up a little bit next year and trusting some of the younger guys. So, are they truly all in? It depends on your definition of all in, because it doesn't seem like the Niners are going to be big spenders in free agency in comparison to years past, meaning they're not going to create as many restructures and continue kicking the can down the road. At least that's not what my anticipation is. If they do, that would clearly show that they are all in this year, and they are understanding that they may need to sacrifice things in the future or really hit on this draft class. But I ultimately believe that they're going to try to find some way to preserve their window in the future while trying to run it back one more time with this core. And so we'll see how that ultimately goes, because the Niners had their best team in 2023 and they ultimately, unfortunately, couldn't get the job done. Now, I'm not a pessimist like that. I'm not going to just say, it's either you get the job done or you don't. There were clearly opportunities for the Niners to get the job done. It went to overtime, but the fact of the matter is teams like the Kansas City Chiefs now are going to get better. They had their reset period and they were still able to be competitive throughout it. Now they're going to get better because they have, a first round pick at their arsenal that they can use. They have, the draft capital and things like that where they're able to replenish their roster. And so curious to see how this offseason ultimately boils down.
To me, it'll tell us, in my opinion, in a way, being all in will tell us how you truly feel about Brock Purdy. And what I mean by that is if you truly believe Brock Purdy is the guy, is the answer, you go 100% in this year. And you're putting your marbles in the middle, you're putting all your chips in the middle and sacrificing cap space down the road with restructures, extensions, and stuff like that, because you're eventually going to lose some of these players. You're going to have to be paying them to not be on your roster, right? And then what I mean by cap, like dead cap, we are talking about that earlier. If you truly believe Brock Purdy is a guy that you could win with, um, once your team is depleted and you let guys go, you go all in, because essentially once you start losing players, you believe Brock Purdy would be able to carry you with less players on your roster and having dead cap. For example, if they trade away Debo, Trent retires, and they have 30 million, 40 million sitting in dead cap. You trust when you do extend Brock Purdy to lower his cap number that first year or two that he could carry you that year or two where you're in cap purgatory, where you're in that tough spot and it's hard to make any big moves, that Brock Purdy is going to be the answer. So to be honest, if you truly trust Brock Purdy and you're all in on him, you go all in this year.
That's interesting. Now, I don't know. We'll see. Personally, I disagree on the notion that to be truly in on Brock Purdy, you go all in this year. But I do understand the premise in the sense that you're right. Brock Purdy's extension in the future is going to eat into the 49ers cap situation more than it already has, in the sense the Niners already have a bit of a cap problem. Extending Brock Purdy will only further the problem, in the sense you're going to have to trust young players more. If you look at the way the Buffalo Bills have kind of treated this offseason today, they're facing the ramifications of now having to pay a quarterback. And it's not like you can't do that. There's no way you upgrade on a top 5 quarterback in the NFL like Josh Allen. He's your franchise quarterback. He's the guy you got to pay, just like several other franchises who have those top 10 quarterbacks have kind of had to deal with, where you have to pay them. You have no other choice, but you do face ramifications as a matter of fact. However, I don't think that going all in this year signifies you're fully in on Brock Purdy, as when you try and preserve the window, I think you are also, specifically in the next 2 years, you're trusting Brock Purdy to kind of work with less, but giving him more opportunities to succeed. I think that if you're preserving for the next 2 years with Brock Purdy still on his rookie deal, I think that that's also you putting your chips into him and saying, we trust that you, even with a lower roster potentially, or a younger roster with a little bit less of the core in 24 and 25, we trust that you are going to be able to pull it together. And so we're going to give you multiple opportunities, but then understand that you're going to have to take more and more of a responsibility as the years go on in a chance to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. You can look at it either way, right? Like you can look at it as, you know what, they truly, if they aren't all in, they truly trust Brock to trade away a player or two because they feel like he could carry them. But I just look at it like he's in his it's gonna be in his third year. After next year, he's getting extended. Like he's gonna get paid. If he puts up good numbers like he did this year, he's getting paid top 5 quarterback money. Like you can't argue that he shouldn't, because he took you to the Super Bowl, he took you to the NFC Championship year 1, Super Bowl year 2, had numbers that were up there with some of the best quarterbacks. At one point was in the MVP conversation. If he follows it up with a great year or a very, very good year, he's going to get paid a lot of money. So I think this is the only opportunity you have to capitalize on his cap numbers right now, because after next year, it'll go up more than the 800,000 he's getting. So it's going to go up to at least 10 million, roughly, depending on what his contract is, or maybe even less, depending on how they structure it and everything. But you're looking at that number to go up within the next 2 years at least. So for me, I think if they go all in and they're signed, they restructure money and they do all that, eventually you're able to cut players and you could restructure deals. It just kind of tells me that how they're going to approach it.
Yeah.
I don't think they're all in though, Rohan. I don't think they're all in.
And I don't know if they should be, in the sense that I think you do have to worry a little bit about the future. And this is where, in my Debo Samuel article, I alluded to, I think that the Debo Samuel trade would be the lone move that ultimately allows you to still have a significant focus in 2024 while slightly preserving the window for the future. The reason being, the Niners have the infrastructure to build their offense around their, players that want more targets. Talk about Brandon Ayuk. He could be a true number 1 receiver. George Kittle could be that true number 2 guy. And then you'd have Christian McCaffrey, who still, he gets a significant amount of volume both on the ground and through the air. Jawan Jennings looking for a bigger role, showcasing glimpses that he could take it. And then likely, what is a rookie receiver? So you could still have 5 options in the offense that you could rely on, allow for the growth of a rookie receiver this year before he elevates to potentially the number 2 or number 3 role in the offense next year. I think you have the pieces to where you can pick it up and continue to work. I believe Deebo Samuel is a vital part of this offense. It's just the way that he's utilized. I think the 49ers can find a different way to implement their offense that better utilizes the rest of their players while, still keeping the infrastructure of their offense together. I think that that's a possibility. Now, I could be wrong. It could backfire. The Niners could miss, the thumper that Deebo Samuel is. But I think the way that his contract is situated, I think if the Niners find a way to move off of it this season, it could provide them some flexibility for the future, which, in my opinion, after what I've heard, is kind of the main priority in a way in trying to preserve some flexibility in the future. As if you trade him post June 1st, you get about $21 million in saving. Yes, you take a $15 million dead cap hit next season, but the point is you can carry over the $21 million, and that in that way, like the Niners did, it saves you from a potential restructure that you might have to do. One potential restructure, you may have to restructure a few things to try and create some of that carryover, but it creates an avenue for you to save one less restructure for a player you necessarily don't want to restructure at the end of the offseason.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Niners have an interesting situation coming up. You definitely have to approach it a certain way. However they truly do it, I don't mind. Like, I don't mind if you're not all in. I understand not being all in. And then what I mean by all in is going out and signing the Daniel Hunter, right? You think he's the best player on the edge market, going out and signing him to make sure your D line is the best of the best. Signing Owenu from New England, signing a top center or a corner. Like, I get if they don't do any of that. I get if they stay pat and bring back Chase Young and say, you know what? We really think Chase Young is it. I get it. But this is your last opportunity with this core. You're gonna have to, like Rohan said, you're gonna have to get rid of some of these guys. Debo's
That's the
gone.
big thing.
I think, to be honest, as much as people will love Debo, I think it makes your offense better not having Debo around. If that makes sense, because now the when the Niners become too reliant on Debo Samuel, Kyle starts trying to force feed things, and the offense becomes a little stagnant, a little one-dimensional in terms of what they're trying to do. You have too many playmakers on this roster to become one-dimensional and only go through one player at times. You're also paying a player extreme money for production that isn't that worthy, right? So for me, I understand it. I don't know if the Niners are all in. You tell me if the Niners are all in. That's it for today's show. Rohan and I discuss free agents that you should have on your radar for the 49ers to sign. Put the pressure on the 49ers. It's you as a fan who is the one putting the product on the field. Be upset. Don't be upset. Rohan, great show. Make sure you guys subscribe to Clutch Gene Sports. Make sure you subscribe to Rohan Chakravarthi's personal channel. Any last comments, Rohan?
No, I mean, a fun show. I got a lot, talked about a lot of different topics overall. And I think that overall, this is going to be a very fun next week, very fun next month as we head into free agency and draft time. A week from today, I believe the tampering period kind of starts where you can start. Well, we know that the free agents are already talking, but that the officially kind of starts. You're going to start hearing about some signings. You might hear about the restructures as team try to get camp compliant. Interesting to see what the Niners do, but fun show, and appreciate you for joining me this last hour.
Absolutely. And if I know Rohan, I know you have some guys, some people watching. I need 4. I'm 4 subscribers away on Clutch Gene Sports from 500. Make sure I get 4 over there and hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys all for tuning in.